Briar Rose, Chapter 9. All around the castle, Gemma said, making tucking and motions, though they were all in sleeping bags in a big tent. A briery hedge began to grow, with thorns as sharp as barbs. What's barbs, Gemma? Syl asked. You never tell us what barbs are. Better you shouldn't know. But we want to know, Gemma, Shanna said. We want to know it all. Little Becca, second finger in her mouth, was already half asleep. From the smaller tent came the sound of Dr. Berlin and his wife talking cozily. Ignoring the question, Gemma continued the tale. Higher and higher the thorny bush grew until it covered the windows and it covered the doors. It covered the high castle towers, and no one could see in and no one could see out, Sylvia said. But you didn't say about the barbs. I want to hear the story, Shanna said, nudging her sister. And no one could see out, Gemma said, oblivious to the two, watching the sleeping Becca as she spoke. And no one cared to know about the sleeping folk inside. I want to know about the barbs, said Sylvia. Shut up, Shanna said. Gemma, she said shut up. Did not, did. And no one cared to know about the sleeping folk inside, Gemma said pointedly. So no one told them about, and neither will I. Now you've done it, Sylvia said. You did too, said Shanna. Please, Gemma, pretty please, with strawberries on it and roses. But Gemma could not be persuaded to finish the story that night. Chapter 10. It was 10 days before Arnie, with an IE, sent the clippings. The prose was flat, and Becca found she had to force herself to go through them, underlying possible salient points. But the yellow marker, the National Archives had surprisingly sent a packet that arrived the same day. Becca worked on them and the dining room table that evening. The house was quiet, Sylvia and Shanna and their families having at last gone home, more reluctantly than Becca would have possibly guessed. Shanna had made her swear to call if she even had the slightest bit blue, and Sylvia had slipped a check of $200 into her pocket, whispering, Buy something for yourself, Becca, just for you. As she sat shuffling through the papers, her father went past on his way to the kitchen. Are you going to wear that stuff out? He commented wryly. All those years with your grandmother hoarded those documents and clippings, and within 2 weeks of her death you were going to crumble from overuse. Leave her alone, Gerald, her mother said, following him into the kitchen. A promise is a promise. They went into the kitchen and out the other door, arguing companionably about popcorn, while Becca settled back to the table full of papers. Arnie Salenbier's article about the Fort Oswego shelter told her little that seemed important to her grandmother's past, except that it gave her a possible starting place. The National Archives, on the other hand, had sent a whole packet of forms relating to the Oswego shelter, including biographical data sheets. They had no information about Donna Stein, or even Donna Mandelstein, or Genevieve Mandelstein, but they had hit pay dirt about Giddel. Biographical data concerning Allied, National, or Neutral. Headed the first sheet. Giddel Mandelstein had been married, had lived in Poland last, and was white, was Jewish, was able to work, all filled in with a steady hand. But the date of that marriage had been left blank, and the village and district in Poland had not been noted, and employment and education questions had not been answered. Where it asked, has registrant a home to which he desires to return, the answer had been left blank as well. The sheet was dated 1944. Giddel, Becca whispered. Giddel Mandelstein. Your life seemed to be mostly blank. How can I possibly fill it in nearly 50 years later? And how do I even know you are my grandmother, my Gemma? There was a loud, braying laugh from the TV room. Her father always enjoyed himself to the fullest. If the laugh was an answer, it was not the one she wanted to hear. What is your true and correct name? Giddel Rose Mandelstein. Rose, Becca said. Really? So elementary, my dear. Watsonstein. If you are a married woman, what was your maiden name? Giddel Rose Mandelstein. Didn't you understand the question, Giddel? What was the English too hard? Becca asked. By what names have you also been known? Include professional names or any other names by which you have been known. Constantia and Eve, Donna, Gemma. What was your last permanent address? The answer was crossed out with a single dark stroke. Male, female, height, 5 foot, weight, 139 pounds, hair red, eyes blue. It has to be Gemma. Height, hair color, eyes, weight. That's much too heavy, Becca thought, sighing. The rest of the questions were mostly left unanswered. Father's name, mother's name, age. Didn't she know them, or had she been hiding something? And why should she hide now that the war was over? Now that she was safe in America, safe in Fort Oswego, safe in a shelter? It made no sense. Under the heading, if you have any living children, in a peculiarly dramatic italic hand, someone had written, "What child due any day?" Maybe, Becca said, standing, maybe that explains the weight. She stretched and headed towards the TV room with a commercial break, and her father had silenced the set with a remote clicker. He was offering the bucket of popcorn to his wife when Becca came in. Mom, exactly when were you born? Exactly August 13th, dear. I thought you knew that. You gave me a present every year. I mean, what year? Why, 1944. Is it important? The TV clicked on again to an aggressive theme music of L.A. Law. Do any day, Becca exclaimed. What, dear? Her mother asked over the sound of Michael Tucker and his wife quarreling. Maybe, Becca said, raising her voice a little. From August 14th to August 30th was simply any day. So you think Giddel Mandelstein was your grandmother and she came from somewhere in Poland, Stan said the next morning, running a bony hand through his hair. He pursed his lips and thought a minute. And what about the other name she was known? Any ideas? No, I've never heard it before. Is it Yiddish? He asked. Probably Polish, she shrugged. At a guess. Don't guess, find out. It's your only lead, he stared thoughtfully at her. Becca had to look away. Stan went into the office and closed the door, and Becca leaned back in her chair. The comforting, familiar sounds surrounded her helped her think. In between writing a story on a local factory strike and organizing the list of the best of the Valley poll, she worked on her grandmother's papers. In her mind, she could hear Howie's nasal voice warning, obsessive-compulsive, and her father cautioning her against wearing out the tattered forms, but Stan had been the one to urge her to continue. When he saw her hunched over the papers that morning, he'd sat at her desk and leaned forward. Stories, he'd said, his voice low and almost husky. We are made up of stories, and even the ones that seem the most like lies can be our deepest hidden truths. I don't think you're going to be happy until you find out who your grandmother was. Becca, just as I couldn't be happy until I found my birth mother. She picked up the phone and called the town hall. When the clerk answered, Becca greeted her warmly. Sorry about your grandmother, the clerk said. Thanks, it's about her, actually, Becca answered. What about? She was called a different name at one time. I think that's Polish, and I know you spoke Polish at home. She spelled it. The clerk chuckled. That's an awful hash you made of the pronunciation. Too many C's and Z's, Becca said, by way of excuse. Is it a common name? Not a name, really. It's pronounced Kashzinka, with a nasal N like a French. Means princess. Becca was stunned. It means princess, she said at last. Like in King and Queen, and the clerk said, a young princess, actually. There's a different word for an old princess. Wow, Becca answered. They both laughed. But as Becca put down the phone, her heart was pounding. Gemma's middle name had been Rose, and her other nickname, alias codename, had been Princess. So Watsonstein, she said to herself, what's so elementary now? She stared at her grandmother's papers for another hour, but could get nothing more from them, and at last pushed them reluctantly to one side to work on the strike story instead. There she had more facts than she needed. Everyone involved had wanted to talk about the issue. It was the focus she hadn't gotten yet. By noon her brain felt scrubbed, and as if she had already worked an entire day. Taking her yogurt out to the side of the waterfall, she sat down on the still cold ground. The pounding of the water over the rocks blocked out everything except the quarreling of two house finches over yesterday's crumbs. I'd give you this, she said to the birds, holding up the half-finished yogurt, but I don't think it's your style. Why not? I like yogurt. Stan squatted down by her side. The noise of his arrival having been disguised by the water's consistent boom, he took the container and spoon from her unresting hands and spooned out some of the strawberry yogurt into his mouth. Startled, Becca found herself blushing unaccountably. Not much left, he said, looking ruefully into the cup. I guess I'll have to go to Monty's and buy my own. He grinned slowly and handed the container back. How's that story? Lots of facts, no focus, she said. Thought you didn't have any real leads. For a moment she was confused, then realized he was talking about her grandmother. Oh, that story. I found out that Kazanskaya, she stumbled over the pronunciation, means princess. Wow, he said. She giggled. Princess, I think I'm liking the story more and more, but I don't think we can talk about it at work. Can I come over this evening and look at the papers with you? No, yes, I mean... The flush on her face deepened. She could tell just from the generated heat on her cheeks. Good, he said, not seeming to notice. I'll be there about dinner, about 7. Sure, she began, but he was already standing and striding across the lawn toward the street. She watched until he was out of sight, then she looked down at the yogurt container. She saw it was empty. She didn't stop her from running her fingers around the inside and popping the finger into her mouth, licking it sensuously and thinking about nothing at all.